Oh, good day. Good day and gratitude. So good to see you. Mm, it should be some good reading. As you know, we're reading Stamp. Well, maybe you don't, but we're reading Stamp from the Beginning. The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Mm, and we have the other book. It's the remix of this book, but it's more compact than this book here is. So we'll go with this one. At some later point in time, we may read this one here. I mean, it's the same book. It's just more uh, compactual for us and stuff. The thief known as racism is all around. Hmm. Oh, a good day. Trayvon! It is so good to see you. Trayvon Smith. I think one of your songs. I think it was one of your songs. Give me just a minute here. I want to. It's been some months. It's been quite a few months, but I was listening to this song when I was going through everyone's page and stuff like that. And the song, I wish I had written it down or saved it. Maybe I did save it. I don't know. But if you make music, then your song, it was a song, and I left you a message on there because I really liked it, the song. It's so good to see you. Yes, it has, my elder. To the true royal melanated family. I know that's right. Sure is right here, right now. It's us. All of this is about us. Yes, all of it is. Yeah, if that's your music and stuff, I'm going to find it and I'm going to comment again because it is a beautiful song and I wanted to use it. I'm pretty sure I wanted to use it, Trayvon. So I will send you a message again. I'm going to find that song. It's been a couple of months. But yeah, it's marvelous. It's a beautiful song, y'all. It is so beautiful. I wanted to make me a video with it, with my ancestors and stuff. Look at that moth. But we ain't going to kill him here. Maybe find his way back outside and stuff. But let's read. It's so good to see you. You are wonderful. Stamp from the beginning. Um, After Malcolm X, I wanted to kind of, get a little bit more understanding of what we working with here. This whole mentality. When I say that everyone in this country is thinking like white folks, even the world, everyone in this world got the same mindset that white people got about us. White folks have taught the world how to feel about us, how to treat us, how to look at us, how to help us, how to have compassion for us, forgiveness for us, understanding and patience for us. Everybody going off of white America's mindset. And after Malcolm X, this book right here, we were going to read Slavery, which was recommended by Sister Chiefess. But I think this is got a part one to it because it says second edition. But I'm gonna look and see because if this book here has another book to it, I want to have them both so I can read them at the same time and stuff. And while I was looking for that, I misplaced that book, and then I found it in the other room in there. And in its place, this book right here. When I looked through them, And I immediately was like, yeah, I'm not that thick book. It's going to take me like 6 months to read this book. It's not though, y'all. It's not. But the title itself, Stamped from the Beginning, the Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. This right here just seemed like it was on time to be read, to give us a more factual and thorough understanding, overstanding of what we working with, how everybody else has come about these ideas and misconceptions about us. And they're not true. Everybody got their hot heads in the groups of people. Everybody got their hot heads in the group of people, in all groups of people, not just ours. You know, and it's a lot of those hotheads are not even traumatized to the extent that Black America is traumatized. We are traumatized. Our bodies, our mentality is so restless dealing with white America. And we ain't never had no focus for us, for ourselves. You know, we had to forsake all of that, especially for us. For those of us that's my age, maybe a little bit older, definitely younger, we haven't seen that fight from us as a people, for us. My mama and them seen it, that fight for us with the Panthers down south. My family knew and stuff. That was their eras. My mother was born in 52. That was my mother's them era. But as far as my era and stuff, no, it hasn't been available to us. You know, how we fight for us and stand up for us. So this book right here just seemed like, yeah, it's on time. You know, so I'm going to read it. I'm going to try to be here every night on time so we can go on and read this book right here by Ibram X. Kendi. Oh, let me get the copyright disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news support, and teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Yeah, I had to get that on out the way and stuff. You were born in 70. I was born in 72. Mm-hmm. Yeah, get you some books too, Trey. And anytime you want to read, let me know. You can do it however you want to. If you want to, you don't have to. I'm gonna read for us anyway. I love to read to us and stuff. I never thought I would be reading to us, to my people. But yeah, we doing it. We can even do it as a recording if you want to. You know, yeah, it just depends and stuff. There's no rush. There's no rush at all. We finally made it to chapter 1. You know, all the other was the introductory, and then we read the reviews and stuff. So let's do it. Let's read, y'all. Chapter 1, Human Hierarchy. They weathered brutal winters, suffered diseases, and learned to cope with the resisting Native Americans. But nothing brought more destruction to Puritan settlements than the Great Hurricane of 1635. On August the 16th, 1635, the hurricane, today judged to be perhaps Category 3, thundered up the Atlantic coast, brushing Jamestown and passing over eastern Long Island. The storm's eye glanced at Providence to the east and moved inland, snatching up thousands of trees like weeds. In the 7-year-old Massachusetts Bay Colony, the hurricane smashed down English homes as if they were ants, before reaching the Atlantic Ocean and swinging knockout waves onto the New England shores. Large ships from England transporting settlers and supplies were sitting ducks. Seamen anchored one ship, the James, off the coast of New Hampshire to wait out the hurricane. Suddenly, a powerful wave sliced the ship's anchors and the cables like an invisible knife. Seamen slashed the third cable in distress and hoisted sail to cruise back out to safer sea. The wind smashed the new sail into rotten rags, recorded notably Puritan minister Richard Mather in his diary. As the rags disappeared into the ocean, so did the hope. Abducted now by the hurricane, the ship headed toward a mighty rock. All seemed lost. Richard Mather and fellow passengers cried out to the Lord for deliverance, using his own immediate good hand. To the Lord, God guided the ship around the mighty rock. Mather later testified, using his own immediate good hand, God guided the ship around the mighty rock. Mather later testified, the sea calmed. The crew hurriedly rigged the ship with new sails. The Lord blew a fresh gale of wind, allowing the captain to navigate away from danger. The battered James arrived in Boston on August the 17th, 1639. Don't tell me they had slaves on that ship. All 100 passengers credited God for their survival. Richard Mather took the deliverance as a charge to walk uprightly before him as long as we live. Maybe not. As a Puritan minister, Richard Mather had walked uprightly through 15 years of British persecution before embarking on the perilous journey across the Atlantic Ocean to begin life anew in New England. There, he would be reunited with his illustrious ministerial friend John Cotton, who had faced British persecution for nearly 20 years in Boston, England. In 1630, Cotton had given the farewell sermon to hundreds of Puritan founders of New England communities, blessing their fulfillment of God's prophetic vision. As the centers from the Church of England, Puritans believed themselves to be God's chosen piece of humanity, a special, superior people, and New England, their Israel, was to be their exceptional land. Within a week of the Great Hurricane, Richard Mather was installed as pastor of Dorchester's New North Church near the renowned North Church of New Boston, which was pastored by John Cotton. Mather and Cotton then embarked on a sacred mission to create, articulate, and defend the New England way. They used their pens as much as their pulpits, and they used their power as much as their pens and pulpits. They penned the colony's first adult and children's books as part of this endeavor. Mather, in all likelihood, steered the selection of Henry Dunster to lead Colonial America's first college. That was Harvard's forerunner in 1640. And Cotton did not mind when Dunster fashioned Harvard's curriculum after their alma mater, the alma mater, Cambridge, setting off an ideological trend. Like the founders of Cambridge and Harvard before them, the founders of William and Mary, 1693, Yale, 1701, the University of Pennsylvania, 1740, Princeton, 1746, Columbia, 1754, Brown, 1764, Rutgers, 1766, and Dartmouth, 1769. The other 8 colonial colleges regarded ancient Greek and Latin literature as universal truths worthy of memorization and unworthy of critique. At the center of the Old and New England Greek library held the resurrected Aristotle, who had come under suspicion as a threat to doctrine among some factions in Christianity during the medieval period. In studying Aristotle's philosophy, Puritans learned rationales for human hierarchy, and they began to believe that some groups were superior to some other groups. In Aristotle's case, ancient Greeks were superior to all non-Greeks, but Puritans believed they were superior to Native Americans, the African people, and even Anglicans, that is, all non-Puritans. Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, I don't understand how the time goes back, the chronological order, but there it is. Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, concocted a a climate theory to justify Greek superiority, saying that extreme hot or extreme cold climates produce intellectually, physically, and morally inferior people who were ugly and lacked the capacity for freedom and self-government. Aristotle labeled Africans burnt faces, the original meaning in Greek of Ethiopian, and viewed the ugly extremes of pale or dark skins as the effect of the extreme cold or extreme hot climates. Ooh-wee. All of this was in the interest of normalizing Greek slaveholding practices and Greece's rule over the Western Mediterranean. Aristotle situated the Greeks in their supreme intermediate climate as the most beautifully endowed superior rulers and enslavers of the whole world. Humanity is divided into two, the masters and the slaves, and if one prefers it, the Greeks and the barbarians, those who have the right to command and those who are born to obey. That's what Aristotle said. For him, the enslaved people were by nature incapable of reasoning and live a life of pure sensation, like certain tribes on the borders of the civilized world, or like people who are diseased throughout the onset of illnesses like epilepsy or madness. By the birth of Christ or the start of the common era, Romans were justifying their slaveholding practices using Aristotle's climate theory. And soon the new Christianity began to contribute to these arguments. For early Christian theologians, whom Puritans studied alongside Aristotle, God ordained the human hierarchy. God ordained the human hierarchy. St. Paul introduced in the first century a three-tiered hierarchy of slave relations. Heavenly masters on the top, earthly masters in the middle, and enslaved is at the bottom. Heavenly master, your master in heaven. St. Paul introduced in the first century the three-tiered hierarchy of slave relations. So you got the heavenly master, the earthly master, and the enslaved at the bottom. He who was free when called is a slave of Christ. He testified in 1 Corinthians. No, I ain't never read that book. Slaves were to obey in everything those that are your earthly masters, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing the Lord. In a crucial caveat in Galatians 3:28, St. Paul equalized the souls of masters and slaves as all one in Jesus Christ. All one in Christ Jesus. You all one. But he got to be the master and you got to be the slave. But yeah, we'll probably look up these scriptures, I guess. Since I am going to have to, read the Bible, I am going to give it a chance. Some of it, at least the contradictions. But damn, I dropped the pen and I really wanted to mark that in this Bible right here. And it fell right in the tub over there with my little things I need. Let me just mark it here. All in all, ethnic and religious and color prejudice existed in the ancient world. Constructions of races. White Europe, Black Africa, for instance, did not, and therefore racist ideas did not. It's going to be more like, let me read that one more time. All in all, ethnic and religious and color prejudice existed in the ancient world. Constructions of races did not. like white Europe and black Africa. And therefore, racist ideas did not exist in the ancient world. But crucially, the foundations of race and racist ideas were laid. And so were the foundations of egalitarianism, anti-racism, and anti-slavery, laid in Greco-Roman antiquity. The deity gave liberty to all men, and nature created no one a slave. And this was wrote by Alcidamas, Alkidamas, Aristotle's rival in Athens. When Herodotus, Herodotus, when Herodotus, the foremost historian of ancient Greece, traveled up the Nile River, he found the Nubians the most handsome of peoples. Lactantius, Lactantius, an advisor of Constantine I, an advisor to Constantine I, the first Christian Roman emperor, announced early in the 4th century, God who creates and inspires men wished them all to be fair, that is equal. St. Augustine, an African church, farther in the 4th and 5th centuries, maintained that whoever is born anywhere as a human being, that is, as a rational mortal creature, however strange he may appear to our senses in bodily form or color or motion or utterance or in any faculty, part, or quality of his nature whatsoever, let no true believer have any doubt that such an individual is descended from the one man who was first created. In other words, everybody came from the parent of all people. However, these anti-slavery and egalitarian champions did not accompany Aristotle and St. Paul into the modern era, into the new Harvard curriculum, or into the New England mind seeking to justify slavery and the racial hierarchy it produced. You know what? I think I got a book about the Roman emperors. I'll find it before we're done with this right here, this book. When John Cotton drafted New England's first constitution in 1936, Moses Bis Judicials. That's Moses BIS. I think that's JUDICIALS. He legalized the enslavement of captives taken in just wars, as well as such strangers as willingly sell themselves or are sold to us. The New England way imitated the Old England way on slavery. Cotton reproduced the policies of his British peers close and far away. But in 1636, Barbados officials announced that Negroes and Indians that come here to be sold should serve for life, unless a contract was before made to the contrary. The Pequot War, the first major war between the New England colonists and the era's indigenous peoples, erupted in 1637. Captain William Pierce forced some indigenous war captives onto the Desire. That's the first slaver to leave British North America. The ship sailed to the Isla de Provincia off Nicaragua, where Negroes were reportedly being kept as perpetual servants. Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop recorded Captain Pierce's historic arrival back into Boston in 1638, noting that his ship was hauling salt, cotton, tobacco, and Negroes. The first generation of Puritans began rationalizing the enslavement of these Negroes without skipping a Christian beat. Their chilling nightmares of persecution were not the only hallucinations the Puritans had carried over the Atlantic waters in their minds to America. From the first ships that landed in Virginia in 1607 to the ships that survived the Great Hurricane of 1635, to the first slave ships, some British settlers of colonial America carried across the sea, Puritan, biblical, scientific, and Aristotelian rationalizations of slavery and human hierarchy. From Western Europe and the new settlements in Latin America, some Puritans carried across their judgment of the many African peoples as one inferior people. They carried across racist ideas that preceded American slavery, because the need to justify African slavery preceded colonial America. Ooh, honey, that was deep when you don't know nothing about it. I feel like I'm just now learning how to read. So, well, I'll wait, because it seemed to me like these Puritans, these Christian Puritans, is that who these Caucasians naturally were? I don't know. My mind trying to put this together and stuff. It's so much. I didn't learn anything about these people in school. My 11 years in there. But let's read. After Arab Muslims conquered parts of North Africa, Portugal, and Spain during the 7th century, Christians and Muslims battled for centuries over the prize of Mediterranean supremacy. Meanwhile, below the Sahara Desert, the West African empires of Ghana, 700 to 1200, Mali, 1200 to 1500, and Songhai, 1350 to 1600, were situated at the crossroads of the lucrative trade routes for the gold and the salt. A robust trans-Saharan trade emerged, allowing Europeans to obtain West African goods through Muslim intermediaries. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai developed empires that could rival in size, rival in power, rival in scholarship, rival in wealth, any other in the world. Intellectuals at universities in Timbuktu and Jenne, Jenne, pumped out scholarship and pumped in students from around West Africa. Songhai grew to be the largest. Mali may have been the most illustrious, the world's greatest globetrotter of the 14th century, who trotted from North Africa to Eastern Europe to Eastern Asia, decided to see Mali for himself in 1352. There is complete security in their country. Moroccan Ibn Battuta marveled in his travel notes. Neither traveler nor inhabitant in it has anything to fear, not from robbers or men of violence. Ibn Battuta was an oddity, an abhorred oddity, among the Islamic intelligentsia in Fez, Morocco. Hardly any scholars had traveled far from home, and Battuta's travel accounts threatened their own armchair credibility in depicting foreigners. None of Battuta's antagonists were more influential than the intellectual tower of the Muslim world at that time. Tunisian Ibn Khaldun. Tunisian Ibn Khaldun, who arrived in Fez just as Battuta returned from Mali. People in the dynasty in official positions whispered to each other that he must be a liar. Khaldun reported in 1377 in the Muqaddimah, Muqaddimab. That's the foremost Islamic history of the pre-modern world. Khaldun, Khaldun is his name. Khaldun then painted a very different picture of sub-Saharan Africa in the Muqaddimah. The Negro nations are, as a rule, submissive to slavery, Khaldun surmised, because Negroes have little that is essentially human, and they possess attributes that are quite similar to those of dumb animals. Damn. Was it anybody? Woo. And all of this was because they couldn't understand the language. They couldn't understand our language. In my opinion, coupled with they saw the gentleness and the trust not readily becoming aware or anticipating their maliciousness, their backstabbing, the deceiving. So that's why they reduced our people to animals and stuff, or dumb animals, in my opinion. And the same applies to the Slavs, argued this disciple of Aristotle. And you know, slave comes from the word Slav. Is that the Slavonians or something like that? I would listen to another brother, he was breaking it down. I didn't take notes on it and stuff, but I remember the word Slavs, Slavs. Following Greek and Roman justifiers, Khaldun used climate theory to justify Islamic enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans and Eastern European Slavs, groups sharing only one obvious characteristic: their remoteness. All their conditions are remote from those of human beings and close to those of wild animals. That's what Khaldun suggested. Their inferior conditions were neither permanent nor hereditary. However, Negroes who migrated to the cooler north were found to produce descendants whose color gradually turns white, Khaldun stressed. Darker skinned people had the capacity for physical assimilation in a colder climate. Later, cultural assimilationists would imagine that culturally inferior African people placed in the proper European cultural environment could or should adopt European culture. But first, physical assimilationists like Khaldun imagined that physically inferior African people placed in the proper cold environment could or should adopt European physicality, white skin and straight hair. To produce descendants whose color. Ibn Khaldun did not intend merely to demean African people as inferior. He intended to belittle all the different looking African and Slavic people whom the Muslims were trading as slaves. Even so, he reinforced the conceptual foundation for racist ideals. On the eve of the 15th century, Khaldun helped bolster the foundation for assimilationist ideas, for racist notions of the environment producing African inferiority. All an enslaver had to do to stop justifying Slavic slavery and inferiority using climate theory and focus on the theory of African people, for the racist attitude towards dark-skinned people to be complete. There was one enslavement theory focused on Black people already circulating, a theory somehow derived from Genesis 9:18 to 29, which said that Negroes were the children of Ham, the son of Noah, and that they were singled out to be Black as the result of Noah's curse, which produced Ham's color and the slavery God inflicted upon his descendants, as Khaldun explained it. The lineage of this curse of Ham theory goes back through the great Persian scholar Tabari. Well, damn. 838 to 923, all the way to Islamic and Hebrew sources. God had permanently cursed ugly blackness and slavery into the very nature of African people. Curse theorists maintain. God had permanently cursed ugly blackness and slavery into the very nature of African people. That's what the curse theories maintain. As strictly a climate theorist, Khaldun discarded the silly story of the curse of Ham. So, wait a minute, ain't this the one where he saw his daddy naked and he was drunk, so he cursed him in the Bible? Although it is clearly Although it clearly supposed black inferiority, the curse theory was like an unelected politician during the medieval period. Muslim and Christian enslavers hardly gave credence to the curse theory. They enslaved too many non-black descendants of Shem and Japheth, Ham's supposed non-cursed brothers for that matter. But the medieval curse theories laid the foundation for segregationist ideas and for racist notions of black genetic inferiority. The shift to solely enslaving black people and justified using the curse of Ham was in the offing. Once that shift occurred, the disempowered curse theory became empowered, and racist ideas truly came into being. They used your scripture, even though there were other non-blacks that were enslaved also, to make it only you, and then flip it into a slavery unlike the world had ever seen before, in my mind's eye. But chapter 2, honey, I'll probably get the vibe of this book maybe by chapter 6. Origins of racist ideas. Richard Mather and John Cotton inherited from the English thinkers of their generation the old racist ideas that African slavery was natural and normal and it was holy. These racist ideas were nearly 2 centuries old when the Puritans used them in the 1630s to legalize and codify New England slavery. And the Virginians had done the same in the 1920s. Back in 1415, Prince Henry and his brothers had convinced their father, King George of Portugal, to capture the principal Muslim trading depot in the Western Mediterranean, Ceuta, 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 on the northeastern tip of Morocco. These brothers were envious of Muslim riches, and they sought to eliminate the Islamic middleman so that they could find the southern source of gold and the black captives and keep it for themselves. They're going to take it for themselves. After the battle, Moorish prisoners left Prince Henry spellbound as they derailed trans-Saharan trade routes down the disintegrated Mali Empire. After the battle, Moorish prisoners left Prince Henry spellbound as they detailed trans-Saharan. Why I keep thinking that's Saharan? Ain't that the same? As they detailed trans-Saharan trade routes down into the disintegrating Mali Empire. Since Muslims still controlled these desert routes, Prince Henry decided to seek the lands by the way of the sea. He sought out those African lands until his death in 1460, using his position as the Grand Master of Portugal's wealthy military order of Christ, successor of the Knights Templar, to draw venture capital and loyal men for his African expeditions. Ain't the African Templars some type of a Ku Klux Klan subgroup? Or maybe that's the Black Knights. But I remember that Knight Templars. In 1452, Prince Henry's nephew, King Alfonso V, commissioned Gomez Eanes de Zurara, Gomeanesdezurara, to write a biography of the life and slave trading work of his beloved uncle. Zurara was a learned and obedient commander in Prince Henry's military order of Christ. In recording and celebrating Prince Henry's life, Zurara was also implicitly obscuring his Grand Master's monetary decision to exclusively trade in African slaves. Exclusively. Only. First and foremost and finally. That's what he was, going to make his wealth. He's going to make his mark. In 1453, Zurara finished an inaugural defense of African slave trading. In 1453, Zurara finished the inaugural defense of slave trading, African slave trading at that, the first European book on Africans in the modern era. The Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea begins the recorded history of anti-Black racist ideas. Zurara's inaugural racist ideals, in other words, were a product of, not a producer of, Prince Henry's racist policies concerning African slave trading. All these people. The Portuguese made history as the first Europeans to settle along the Atlantic beyond the Western Sahara's Cape Bajota in order to bring enslaved Africans back to Europe, as Zurara shared in his book. The 6 caravels, carrying 240 captives, arrived in Lagos, Portugal on August the 6th, 1444, day before yesterday. Prince Henry made the slave auction into a spectacle to show the Portuguese had joined the European League of Serious Slave Traders of African people. For some time, the Genoese, Genoese, the Genoese of Italy, the Catalans of northern Spain, and the Valencians of eastern Spain had been raiding the Canary Islands or purchasing African slaves from Moroccan traders. Zurara distinguished the Portuguese by framing their African slave trading ventures as missionary expeditions. Prince Henry's competitors could not play that mind game as effectively as he did, in all likelihood because they still traded so many Eastern Europeans. But see, they're going to stop that. It's going to only just be trading Africans, Black people. But the market was changing. Around the time the Portuguese opened their sea route to a new slave export area, the old slave export area started to close up. In Ibn Khaldun's day, most of the captives sold in Western Europe were Eastern Europeans who had been seized by Turkish raiders from areas around the Black Sea. So many of the seized captives were Slavs that the ethnic term became the root word for slave in most Western European languages. By the mid-1400s, Slavic communities had built forts against slave raiders, causing the supply of Slavs in Western Europe's slave market to plunge at around the same time that the supply of Africans was increasing. As a result, Western Europeans began to see the natural slave not as white, but as Black. The captives in 1444 disembarked from the ship and marched to an open space outside the city, according to Zurara's Chronicle. Prince Henry oversaw the slave auction. He mounted on horseback, beaming in delight, honey. Some of the captives were white enough, fair enough to look upon, and well proportioned, while others were like mulattoes, Zurara reported. Still, others were as black as Ethiops and so ugly that they almost appeared as visitors from hell. The captives included people in the many shades of the Tuareg Moors, as well as the dark-skinned people whom the Tuareg Moors may have enslaved. And that's Tuaregmoors. Despite their different ethnicities and skin colors, Zurara viewed them as one people, one inferior people. Zurara made it a point to remind his readers that Prince Henry's chief riches in quickly seizing 46 of the most valuable captives lay in his own purpose, for he reflected with great pleasure upon the salvation of those souls that before were lost. In building up Prince Henry's evangelical justification for enslaving Africans, Zurara reduced these captives to barbarians who desperately needed not only religious, but also civil salvation. They lived like beasts, without any custom of reasonable beings, he wrote. What's more? They have no knowledge of bread or wine, and they were without covering of clothes or of the lodgment of houses. And what's worse than all, they had no understanding of good, but only knew how to live in bestial sloth. In Portugal, their lot was quite the contrary of what it had been. Zurara imagined slavery in Portugal as an improvement over their free state in Africa. Zurara's narrative covered from 1434 to 1447. During that period, Zurara estimated 927 enslaved Africans were brought to Portugal, the greater part of whom were turned into the true path of salvation. Zurara failed to mention that Prince Henry received the royal fifth, that's the quinto, or about 185 of those captives for his immense fortune, because he was a prince. So a prince had to have slaves. So he got like 185 of them. But that was irrelevant to his mission, a mission he accomplished. For convincing readers, successive popes, and the reading European world that Prince Henry's Portugal did not engage in the slave trade for money, Zurara was handsomely rewarded as Portugal's chief royal chronicler. And he was given 2 more lucrative commanderships in the military order of Christ. Zurara's bosses quickly reaped returns for their slave trading. In 1466, a Zech traveler noticed that the king of Portugal was making more selling captives to foreigners than from all the taxes levied on the entire kingdom. Yes, the king of Portugal was making more by selling captives to foreigners than from all the taxes levied on the entire kingdom. Yep, he was making more with the slaves. Zurara circulated the manuscript of the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea to the royal court, as well as to the scholars, the investors, and the captains, who then read and circulated it throughout Portugal and Spain. Zurara died in Lisbon in 1474, but his ideas about slavery endured as the slave trade expanded. By the 1490s, Portuguese explorers had crept southward along the West African coast, rounding the Cape of Good Hope into the Indian Ocean. In their growing networks of ports, agents, ships, crews, and financiers, pioneering Portuguese slave traders and explorers circulated the racist ideas in Zurara's book faster and farther than the text itself had ever reached. The Portuguese became the primary source of knowledge on unknown Africa and the African people for the original slave traders and enslavers in Spain, Holland, France, and England. By the time German printer Valentin Fernandez published an abridged version of Zurara's book in Lisbon in 1506, enslaved Africans and racist ideas had arrived in the Americas. Yep, had arrived in the Americas, honey. As concrete, as truth, as law, as God-given. But let's read. In 1481, the Portuguese began building a large fort, Sao Jorge da Mina, simply known as El Mina, or the Mine, M-I-N-E, as part of their plan to acquire Ghanaian gold. In due time, this European building, the first known to be erected south of the Sahara, became West Africa's largest trading post, slave trading post, the nucleus of Portugal's operations in West Africa. A Genoese explorer, barely 3 decades old, may have witnessed the erection of Elmina Castle. Christopher Columbus, newly married to the daughter of a Genoese protege of Prince Henry, desired to make his own story, but not in Africa, though. He looked instead to East Asia, the source of spices. After Portuguese royalty refused to sponsor his daring westward expedition, Queen Isabel of Spain, a great niece of Prince Henry, consented. So, in 1492, after 69 days at sea, Columbus motherfucking ass, his 3 small ships touched the shores that Europeans did not know existed. First, the glistening Bahamas, and the next night was Cuba. And then we got a book, 1492. No, I think it's 1493 is the name of that book. And it's a thick book also. And I was like, when I saw it, I said, let me get it, because it was talking about Christopher Columbus motherfucking ass. And I was taught that Christopher was a hero when I was growing up. Let me see, I'm just going to look in this one place right here, because it really is a good book. I don't know when we'll get to it. Yeah, it's 1493. See, it's 1493. This book here. Uncovering the New World Columbus Created. And this is by Charles C. Mann, best-selling author of 1491. This might be a couple of books. 1491, 92, and 93. I'm thinking, I'm going to have to go back. And I'm going to have to spend a little time in this era here, it seems like. But almost from Columbus's arrival, almost from the beginning, Spanish colonists began to degrade and enslave the indigenous American peoples, naming them Negros de Terra. Negros de Terra. That's blacks from the land, transferring their racist constructions of African people onto Native Americans. Almost from Columbus's arrival, Spanish colonists began to degrade and enslave the indigenous American people. That's us, indigenous. Naming them Negros de Terra, blacks from the land, transferring their racist constructions of African people onto Native Americans. Over the years that followed, they used the force of the gun and the Bible in one of the most frightful and sudden massacres in human history. Thousands of Native Americans died resisting enslavement. More died from European diseases, from the conditions they suffered while forcibly tilling fields and on death marches searching and mining for gold. Millions of Native Americans were driven off their land by Spanish settlers dashing into the colonies after riches. Spanish merchant Pedro de las Casas settled in Hispaniola in 1502, the year the first enslaved Africans disembarked from a Portuguese slave ship. He brought along his 18-year-old son, Bartolome, who would play an outsized role in the direction slavery took in the so-called New World. In 1510, Bartolome de las Casas had accumulated land and captives, as well as his ordination papers as the America's first priest. Ain't that about some shit? He felt proud in welcoming the Dominican friars to Hispaniola in 1511. Sickened by Taino slavery, the friars, F-R-I-A-R-S, the friars, I ain't never seen them before, but the friars stunned Las Casas and broke abolitionist ground, rejecting the Spanish line taken from the Portuguese that the Taino people benefited through Christianity from slavery. I know. Sickened by Taino slavery, T-A-I-N-O, maybe I'm saying it wrong. Maybe it's Taino. Taino. Sickened by Taino slavery, the friars stunned Las Casas and broke abolitionist ground, rejecting the Spanish lines that the Taino people benefited through Christianity from slavery. King Ferdinand promptly called the Dominican freers, but their anti-slavery sermons never left Bartolome de las Casas. In 1515, he departed for Spain, where he would conduct a lifelong campaign to ease the suffering of Native Americans, and possibly more importantly, to solve the settlers' extreme labor shortage. In one of his first written pleas in 1516, Las Casas suggested importing enslaved Africans to replace the rapidly declining Native American laborers, a plea he made again 2 years later. Alonso de Zuazo, Zuazo, a University of Salamanca trained lawyer, had made a similar recommendation back in 1510. General license should be given to bring Negroes, a people strong for work, the opposite of the natives, so weak who can work only in undemanding tasks, Zuazo wrote. In time, some indigenous people had caught wind of this new racist idea, and they readily agreed to a policy of importing African laborers would be better. An indigenous group in Mexico complained that the difficult and arduous work involved in harnessing a sugar crop was only for the blacks and not for the thin and weak Indians. Las Casas and Company birthed twins, racist twins that some Native Americans and Africans took in. The myth of the physically strong, beastly African and the myth of the physically weak Native American who easily died from the strain of hard labor. Although Las Casas' ideas were at first discounted, his treatises soon became a useful tool for Spain's growing empire and its investment in American slavery. Bishop Sebastian Ramirez de la Funiel reported in 1531 that the entire population of Hispaniola, San Juan, and even Cuba are demanding that they should have Negroes to mine gold and produce crops. Las Casas led the charge for the historic passage in 1542 of the New Laws of the Indies for the Good Treatment and Preservation of the Indians. That memorable year, he also finished and sent to Prince Philip II his classic, A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies, and issued his third memorial recommending that enslaved Africans replace Native Americans. At some point after that, Las Casas read Gomez Eames de Zarago's book. The more he read, the less he could square the African slave trade with the teachings of Jesus Christ. In History of the Indies, 1561, released 5 years before his death, Las Casas regretted the advice he gave to the king to import enslaved Africans. He saw in Zarago's writing evidence revealing the slave trade to be the horror that it is. Las Casas lamented Zarago's attempt to blur the slave trade with the mercy and goodness of God. Las Casas tried to close the door on African slavery after opening it for so many Spanish slaveholders. He failed. A powerful reformer labeled a radical extremist in his last days. Like every anti-racist who came after him, Las Casas was condemned in Spain after his death, and his works were practically banned there. Catholic Spain's protesting rivals published and republished his devastating account of the destruction of the Indies in Dutch in 1578, in French in 1578, in English in 1583, and again in German in 1599, in their quest to label the Spanish Empire corrupt and morally repugnant, all in their quest to replace Spain as Europe's superpower. Despite Spain's rise, Portugal remained an undisputed power of the African slave trade. And Gomez ends that Zurara's racist ideas remained Europe's undisputed defenders of slave trading until another man, an African, rose up to carry on the legacy. See, around 1510, Al-Hassan ibn Muhammad al-Wazan al-Fassi, a well-educated Moroccan, accompanied his uncle on a diplomatic mission down into the Songhai Empire. 8 years later, he was enslaved on another diplomatic voyage along the Mediterranean Sea. His captors presented the learned 24-year-old to the scholarly Pope Leo X in Italy. Pope Leo X in Italy. Before dying in 1521, the Pope freed the youngster, converted him to Christianity, renamed him Johannes Leo, and possibly commissioned him to write a survey of Africa. He became known as Leo the African or Leo Africanus. He satisfied Italian curiosity in 1526 with the first scholarly survey of Africa in Europe, Della Descrizione dell'Africa. Yep, Della Descrizione dell'Africa. That means description of Africa. Leo Africanus described the etymology of Africa and then surveyed African geography, languages, cultures, religions, and diseases. His summation: there's no nation under heaven more prone to venery sexual indulgence, more prone to venery, venery, than sexual indulgence. The Africans lead a beastly kind of life, being utterly destitute to the use of reason, of dexterities of wit, and of all arts, Africanus wrote. They behave themselves as if they had continually lived in a forest among wild beasts. Now, see, this is his ass thinking like white folks and stuff. And then he had to sum up Africa for them. And I'm pretty sure he had to do it over and over again until he got it to their liking, in my opinion. Because even though it was remote and without the luxuries of life, that, you know, running water and electricity and stuff like that, they had a system. They had a civilization. That was their lives, their livelihood. Do anybody criticize the Amish today for not having running water and lights and stuff like we do? Just flip on the light switch. Leo the African did not ignore the elephant in the room, though. How do I myself write so homely of Africa, he asked, when I stand indebted to Africa, both for my birth and my education? He considered himself to be a historiographer, charged with telling the plain truth in all places. Afrikaners did not mind if Africans were denigrated. He believed he was describing Africans accurately. Leo Africanus established himself through Della Descrizione dell'Africa as the world's first known African racist, the first illustrious African producer of racist ideas, as Zurara was the first illustrious European producer of racist ideas. Anyone can consume or produce racist ideas of African inferiority. Any European, any Asian, any Native American, any Latino, and any African too. Leo's African ancestry hardly shielded him from believing in African inferiority and European superiority, or from trying to convince others of this plain racist truth. Leo Africanus may have never visited the 15 African lands he claims to have seen. He could have paraphrased the notes of Portuguese travelers, but veracity did not matter. Once the manuscript was finished in 1526, once it was published in Italian in 1550, and once it was translated into French and Latin in 1556, readers across Western Europe were consuming it and tying African people to heterosexuality, to animals, and to the lack of reason. It is not known what happened to Leo the African. the author of the most widely read and most influential book on Africa, next to Zararas, during the 1500s. He made countless Europeans feel that they knew him, or rather, that they knew Africa. Around the time Leo the African's text was making its way through Europe, and around the time Richard Mather's parents were born, the British began their quest to break the Portuguese monopoly on African slave trade, eager to reap the benefits and grow their empire. In 1554, an expedition captained by John Locke, L-O-K, ancestor of philosophy, by John Locke, L-O-K, ancestor philosopher John Locke, L-O-C-K-E, we'll say John Locke and John Locke, arrived in England after traveling to Guinea. Locke and his compatriots, Robert Gainish and William Torrson, docked with 450 pounds of gold, 250 Irish tucks, and 5 enslaved African men. These 3 Englishmen established themselves as the new authorities on Africa and African people among curious British minds. Their opinions seem to be shaped as much by the Portuguese and French as by their own observations. Sounding like Leo Africanus or Zarura, Gainish labeled Africans a people of beastly living, without a god, without a law, without a religion or commonwealth. The 5 beasts that he and his shipmates brought back to England all learned English and were sent back to Africa to serve as translators for English traders. So see, this indoctrination, y'all. This indoctrination has been going on. Yep. They learned English and were sent back to Africa to infiltrate. As English contact with Africans matured, so did the desire to explain the radical color differences. Writers like Gainish applied climate theory to the dark skins of Africa and light skins of Europe. The popular theory made sense when looking at Europe, the Mediterranean, and Africa. But what about the rest of the world? During the final decades of the 16th century, a new genre of British literature adopted a different theory. Writers brought amazing stories of the world into Anglican homes, into the Puritan homes of Richard Mather and John Cotton, and into the homes of other future leaders of colonial America. And these worldly stories were as racist as they were amazing. Honey, we on chapter 3. We made it to chapter 3. I got to keep going. Yeah, just this right here, coming to America. Woo. Explorers wrote about their adventures, and their tales fascinated Europeans. This new travel literature gave Europeans sitting by their firesides a window into faraway lands where different-looking people resided in cultures that seemed exotic and strange. But the literary glimpses that explorers provided of African lands were usually overshadowed by the self-interest of the backers of the expeditions, who aimed most of all to fulfill their colonizing and slave trading desires. Even a lonely abolitionist, French philosopher Jean Bolden, Bodin, found his thoughts bogged down by tales connecting 2 simultaneous discoveries, that of West Africans and that of the tall, tailless apes walking around like humans in West Africa. Africa's heat had produced hypersexual Africans, Bolden theorized in 1576, and intimate relations between the men and beasts still give birth to monsters in Africa. The climate theory of Africa's hot sun transforming the people into uncivil beasts of burden still held the court of racist opinion, but not much longer. For English traveler writer George Best, climate theory fell apart when he saw in an Arctic voyage in 1577 that the Inuit, I-N-U-I-T, the Inuit people in northeastern Canada, they were darker than the people living in the hotter south. In a 1578 account of the expedition, Best shied away from climate theory and explaining the Ethiopians' blackness. And he spelled it Blacknesse, like blackness, like finesse, blackness. He founded an alternative, Holy Scripture. Holy Scripture, or the curse theory that had recently been articulated by a Dominican friar in Peru and a handful of French intellectuals, a theory more enticing to slaveholders. In best whimsical interpretation of Genesis, Noah orders his white and angel-like sons to abstain from sex with their wives on the ark, and then tells them that the first child born after the flood would inherit the earth. When the evil, tyrannical, and hypersexual Ham had sex on the ark, God wills that Ham's descendants shall be so black and loathsome in best telling that it might remain a spectacle of disobedience to all the world. The first major debate between races had invaded the English discourse. This argument about the cause of inferior blackness, cause, curse or climate, nature or nurture, would rage for decades and eventually influence settlers to America. Curse theorists were first known segregationists. They believed that Black people were naturally and permanently inferior and totally incapable of becoming white. Climate theorists were the first known assimilationists, believing Black people had been nurtured by the hot sun into a temporary inferiority, but they were capable of becoming white if they moved to a cooler climate. George Best produced his curse theory in 1578 in the era between Henry VII and Oliver Cromwell, a time during which the English nation was experiencing the snowballing, conflicting passions of overseas adventure and domestic control, or to use historian Winthrop Jordan's words, of voyages of discovery overseas and inward voyages of discovery. The mercantile expansion abroad, the progressively commercialized economy at home, the fabulous profits, the exciting adventure stories, and the class welfare all destabilized the social order in Elizabethan England, a social order being intensely scrutinized by the rising congregation of morally strict, hyper-dictating, pious Puritans. George Best used Africans as social mirrors, to use Jordan's phrase, for the hyposexuality, greed, and lack of discipline, the devil's machinations that he first found in England but could not speak of. Normalizing negative behavior in faraway African people allowed writers to denormalize negative behavior in white people, to denormalize what they witnessed during intense appraisals of self and nation. Normalizing negative behavior in faraway African people allowed writers to denormalize negative behavior in white people, to denormalize what they witnessed during intense appraisals of self and nation. Probably no one in England collected and read travel stories more eagerly than Richard Hakluyt, Hakluyt. In 1589, he published his travel collection in The Principal Navigations, Voyages, and Discoveries of the English Nation. In assuming this monumental collection of nearly all the available documents describing British overseas adventures, Hakluyt urged explorers, traders, and missionaries to fulfill their superior destiny, to civilize, Christianize, capitalize, and command the world. The Puritans believed too in civilizing and Christianizing the world, but their approach to the project was slightly different from that of most explorers and expedition sponsors. For the others, though, it was about economic returns or political power. For Puritan preachers, it was about bringing social order to the world. Cambridge professor William Perkins rested at the cornerstone of of British Puritanism in the late 16th century. Though the servant in regard of faith and the inner man be equal to his master, in regard to the outward man, the master is above the servant. He explained in Ordering, this is the name of the book, I guess, Ordering of Family, Ordering of Family, and that's Family. This was so old, their spellings is different. They even spelled the word world, Worlde. Black is spelled Blacke. Ordering a Family, published in 1590. So if you was to look up that book, it would be Ordering a Family, family, published in 1590. And paraphrasing St. Paul, Perkins became one of the first major English theorists, or assimilationist theologians, to be more precise, to match the exploitative master-servant or master-slave relationship as a loving family relationship. He thus added to Zarawa's justifying theory of Portuguese enslavers nurturing African beasts. For generations to come, assimilationist slaveholders from Richard Mather's New England to Hispaniola would shrewdly use this lovingly family mask to cover up the exploitation and brutality of slavery. It was Perkins' family ordering that Puritan leaders like John Cotton and Richard Mather used to sanction slavery in Massachusetts a generation later. It was Perkins' family ordering that Puritan leaders like John Cotton and Richard Mather used to sanction slavery in Massachusetts a generation later. And it was Perkins' claim of equal souls and unequal bodies that led Puritan preachers like Cotton and Mather to minister to African souls and not challenge the enslavement of their bodies. To preach to the slaves, but not challenge the enslavement of their bodies. Richard Mather was born in 1596 in northeastern England at the height of William Perkins' influence. After Perkins died in 1602, Puritan Paul Baynes, Baynes, succeeded him at Cambridge. Richard Mather closely studied Baynes' writings, and he probably could quote his most famous treatise, Commentary on Euphuism, Commentary on Ephesians. Commentary on Ephesians. In the commentary, Baynes says slavery was partly a curse for sins and partly a result of civil condition or barbarism. Black Moors were slavish, he said, and he urged slaves to be cheerfully obedient. Masters were to show their superiority through kindness and through a display of a white, sincere heart. Well, as Richard Mather came of age, Richard Hakluyt, 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 was establishing himself as England's greatest promoter of overseas colonization. Hakluyt surrounded himself with a legion of travel writers, translators, explorers, traders, investors, colonizers, everyone who might play a role in colonizing the world, and he began mentoring them. In 1597, he urged mentee John Pori, a recent Cambridge graduate, to complete a translation that may have been on Hakluyt's list for quite some time now. Pori translated Leo Africanus's Geographical Histories of Africa into English in 1600. English readers consumed it as quickly as other Europeans had for decades, honey, and they were just as impressed. In a long introduction, Pori argued that climate theory could not explain the geographical distinctions in color. They must be hereditary, Pori suggested. Africans were descended from Ham, the cursed son of Noah. Whether they chose to illuminate the stamp of blackness through curse theory or climate theory, the travel writers and translators of the time had a larger common goal, and they accomplished it. They ushered in the British Age of Adventure. They were soon followed by another group, the playwrights. With the English literacy rate low, many more British imaginations were churned by playwrights than by travel writers. At the turn of the century, a respected London playwright from Stratford upon Avon, was escorting English audiences back into the ancient world and around modern Europe. From Scotland, Macbeth, to Denmark, Hamlet, to inferior blackness and superior whiteness in Italy. That's the tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice. I had a play of Othello. I might still have the book too. The racial politics of William Shakespeare's Othello did not surprise English audiences when it premiered in 1604. By the late 1500s, English dramatists were used to manufacturing Satan's black agents on earth. English dramatists were used to manufacturing Satan's black agents on earth. Satan's black agents. English dramatists were used to manufacture. Oh, so whatever they were working on, whatever project they were working on, they could easily manufacture, draw up black men. Shakespeare's first black character, the evil, oversexed Aaron in Titus Andronicus. Shakespeare's first black character, the evil, oversexed Aaron in Titus Andronicus. That's Titus Andronicus. First came to the stage in 1594. Down in Spain, dramatists frequently staged black people as cruel idiots in the genre called Comedias de Negros. Shakespeare's Othello is a Moorish Christian general in the Venetian military, a character inspired by the 1565 Italian tale Gli, Gli, Hecatomiti, 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 Hecatomiti. That's it. Hecatomiti, and possibly by Leo Africanus, the Christian Moor in Italy who despised his blackness. Shakespeare's Othello is a Moorish Christian general in the Venetian military, a character inspired by the 1565 Italian tale Gli Hecatomiti, and possibly inspired by Leo Africanus, the Christian Moor in Italy who despised his blackness. Othello's trusted ensign, Lago, Lago, resents Othello for marrying the Venetian Desdemona. For that I do suspect the lusty Moor hath leaped into my seat, Lago explains. To Desdemona's father, Lago labels Othello an old black ram, tupping your white ewe. Lago manipulates Othello to make him believe his wife betrayed him. Her name that was as fresh as Dion's visage is now begrimed and black as mine own face, Othello says before strangling Desdemona. At the play's climax, Othello realizes his dead wife's innocence and confesses to Emilia, Desdemona's maidservant. Oh, the more angel she, Emilia responds, and you the blacker devil. Othello commits suicide. I guess after he had killed and realized she was innocent, he was saying that she's more angel than ever. Now that he done killed her, and her maid said, and you the blacker devil. You more evil than ever. So he commits suicide. The theater-loving Queen Elizabeth, did not see Othello as she did some of Shakespeare's earlier plays. She died in 1603 when the deadly plague of 1604 subsided. Her successor, King James I, arrived in London and started making plans for his grand coronation. Wait Now, which one did King James wrote the Bible? Was it King James the Fifth? King James the First and his wife, Queen Anne of Denmark, they saw Othello, but King James the First commissioned Shakespeare's rival playwright, Ben Jonson, to produce an alluring international mass for his coronation and to mark the end of Elizabeth's self-isolation. Queen Anne proposed an African theme to reflect the new king's international focus. Leo Africanus, travel stories, and Othello had sparked the queen's interest in Africa. Satisfying his queen, Johnson wrote The Mask of Blackness. Premiering on January 7th, 1605 in the Great Hall of London's sparkling Whitehall Palace, which overlooks the snowy banks of the Thames River, The Mask of Blackness was the most expensive production ever presented in London. Its elaborate costumes, exciting dancing, sensational choirs, booming orchestras, exotic scenery, and a luxurious banquet caused all in attendance to marvel at the spectacle. Inspired by climate theory, it was the story of 12 ugly African princesses of the river god Niger, who learned they can be made beautiful if they travel to Britannia, where the sun beams shine day and night, and are forced to blanch in ether and revive a corpse. Wow, I guess that was it. It's the story of 12 ugly African princesses of the river god Niger who learned they could be made beautiful if they travel to Britannia, where the sunbeams shine day and night and are a force to blanch an ether or revive a corpse. Queen Anne herself and 11 court ladies, they played the African princesses in blackface and inaugurated the use of black paint on the royal stage. Ooh. The Mask of Blackness presented the imperial vision of King James I, Prince Charles, Richard Hakluyt, and a powerful lineup of English investors, merchants, missionaries, and explorers. And it helped renew British determination to expand Britannia to America. Yep. We're getting a little church here too, ain't we? King James. King James chartered the London Company in 1606 with his eyes on North America. One eye on Virginia and the other one on New England. Although misfortune plagued the New England undertakings, Virginia fared better. Captain John Smith, a mentee of Richard Hakluyt, helped command the expedition of roughly 150 volunteers on the 3 boats that entered the Chesapeake Bay on April 26, 1607. Against all the odds, and thanks to the assistance of the indigenous Powhatan Americans, North America's first permanent English settlement arrived. His mission accomplished, John Smith returned as a hero to England in October 1609. In colonizing Virginia and later colonizing New England, the British had already begun to conceive of distinct races. Yeah, they were getting ready to separate each other by races, color. The word race first appeared in Frenchman Jacques de Brézes, Jacquesdebreze, Jacques de Brézes' 1481 poem, The Hunt, where it referred to hunting dogs. As the term expanded to include humans over the next century, it was used primarily to identify and differentiate and animalize African people. The poem The Hunt was. The term did not appear in a dictionary until 1606, when French diplomat John Nicot, Jean, maybe it's Jean, but in them times I think it was pronounced John. Jean Nicot included an entry for it. Race means descent, he explained, and it is said that a man, a horse, a dog, or other animal is from good or bad race. Thanks to this malleable concept in Western Europe, the British were free to lump the multi-ethnic Native Americans and the multi-ethnic Africans into the same racial groups. In time, Nico's construction became as addictive as the tobacco plant, which he introduced in France. Wow. And see, because they uh, considered us animals and they were able to animalize African people when they were speaking of, when he said that race means descent, and it is said that a man, a horse, a dog, or any other animal, then that lumped us in there with it. When he said that a man, a horse, or dog, any other animal, your mule, your cat, whatever, it lumped us in with the animals. Captain John Smith never returned to Jamestown. He spent the rest of his life as the greatest literary mentee of Richard Hakluyt, promoting British migration to America. Thousands crossed the Atlantic Ocean, moved by Smith's exhilarating travel tales, which by 1624 included his tale of Pocahontas saving his life. Pocahontas, the civilized savage, had by then converted to Christianity, married an Englishman, and visited London. The English approved. Black people did not fare so well in Smith's estimation. Settlers read his worldly, or rather racist, opinions, though, and adopted them as their own. In his final book, published the year of his death in 1631, Smith told unexperienced New England planters that the enslaved Africans were as idle and as devilish as any in the world. Apparently, Smith thought the knowledge would be useful to planters, probably knowing it was only a matter of time before enslaved Africans were brought to New England. But Smith was only recasting ideas he had heard in England between the mask of blackness, the founding of Virginia, and the founding of New England. Ideas English intellectuals had probably learned from Spanish enslavers and Portuguese slave traders. Men that have low and flat nostrils are as libidinous as apes. Libidinous. Men that have low and flat nostrils are as libidinous as apes. Clear Edley Topsail explained in 1607 in History of Four-Footed Beasts. And that's Historie. Everything, the spelling is a little different. A four-footed beast, Foure. Footed, and beast is Beastes. King James made the common associations of apes and devils in his 1957 book, Demonology. Oh shit, I don't want to knock that. Demonology. Wasn't we talking about this not too long ago when I was saying something about the Bible? The Bible was written. Here it is right here. Now, the Bible was written by multiple authors. Demonology was written by King James VI of Scotland, who later became King James I of England, the same one we talking about. Remember a few readings ago, and I said he wrote this book, your Bible, and then he wrote another book, the exact opposite, where he wrote your Bible, your King James, had something to do with King James, and also with this book, Demonology. Now, I got demonology spelled like it's spelled to us, Demonology. However, in this book, it's spelled Demonoelogie because of the spellings. But see, he didn't write the Bible. He authorized his translation of the Bible. The Bible had a lot of authors to it, though. But yeah, let's read. I just remember I had wrote that and I stuck it on the wall, but then I mentioned it and I couldn't find it. That other book that I was talking about. It's the Bible he authored. He gave permission for the King James Bible. And then this book right here. Wow, that is. Ain't no coincidences, I tell you that though. And ain't no coincidences. Daemonologie. That's how they spell demonology in this book. And if you want to look up his book, King James book, it was in 1597. The book is Demonology. Daemonologie. If I see it, I'm gonna get it. In one of his last plays, The Tempest, in 1611, Shakespeare played on these associations of the ape and the devil, an African in Crafton Caliban, the hypersexual bastard child of a demon, and an African rich from a vile race. I thought y'all said Shakespeare was a genius. I thought Shakespeare was somebody to uphold as bright and moral, gifted. His ass sounded just as creepy and demonic, a motherfucking flimsy mindset, evil. I'm just saying, I thought did y'all know this? Y'all made me think Shakespeare. Oh, yeah, you should read Shakespeare. Shakespeare, you should read him. He's brilliant. Which part? Y'all must be talking about the latter stuff that were published and that were made public for everybody. Because you couldn't have been talking about this. Like in 1614, England's first famous working class poet, John Taylor, said that black nations adore the black devil. In a 1615 address for the planters in Ireland and Virginia, the Reverend Thomas Cooper said that white Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons, shall be lord over the cursed race of Cham, Cham, meaning Noah's son Ham, in Africa. Future Virginia politician George Sandys, Sandys, also conjured curse theory to degrade blackness. In a 1620 paraphrase of Genesis, future politician Thomas Payton wrote of Cain, or the Southern man, as a black deformed elf, and the northern white like unto God himself. 5 years later, clergyman Samuel Purchas, Purchas, released the gargantuan 4-volume Hakluyt posthumous. The man Hakluyt, Richard Hakluyt, Hakluyt, well, this man here, this clergyman, I guess he's a pastor, Samuel Purchas, he releases the gargantuan 4-volume Hakluyt, Richard Hakluyt. It's a book off of him. Hakluyt, posthumous of travel manuscripts left to him by his mentor, Richard Hakluyt. And you know, Richard Hakluyt got all them writings from Africanus, Leo Africanus. When Leo wrote all of that stuff about his homeland, Africa, which could have been what, you know, his indoctrinated mind conjured up, things that he heard white folks saying and that he believed. So it all goes back to it and stuff. If I see it, I get it. Purchas blasted the filthy sodomites, sleepers, ignorant, beasts, disciples of Cham, to whom the black darkness is reserved forever. To whom the black darkness is reserved forever and ever. These were the ideas about African people circulating throughout England and the English colonies as African people were being hauled into Britannia on slave ships. Woo-wee! Honey, it seemed like this the page 1. But yeah, we're going to get through this chapter right here, and then I think we'll start tomorrow. Will we even make it through this chapter right here? Yeah, we could do it. In 1619, Richard Mather began ministry not far from the future center of the British slave trade, the port of Liverpool. In those days, the British slave trade was minuscule, and Africans hardly existed in Britannia, but that would change soon. The vessels of slave traders were cruising deeper and deeper into the heart of West Africa, especially after the Moroccans, armed with English guns, crushed the Songhai Empire. Yeah, it's Songhai. Songhay. Songhai Empire in 1591. The vessels of English commerce were cruising deeper and deeper into Virginia too, as English merchants competed with the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the rising Dutch and French empires. The first recorded slave ship to arrive in colonial America laden with African people was not originally intended for the English colonies. The Spanish ship San Juan Bautista departed Angola in July 1619, hauling 350 captives, probably headed for Veracruz, Mexico. Latin American slaveholders had used racist ideas to craft a permanent slavery for the 250,000 Americans they held at that time. Two pirate ships probably attacked the Spanish ship in the Gulf of Mexico, snatching some 60 captives, and then headed east. Weeks later, in August 1619, the pirates sold 20 of their Angolan captives in Jamestown to Virginia Governor George Yeardley, the owner of 1,000 acres. Ain't they got some soap out there at the Dollar Tree called Yeardley? If I see it, I'm going to get one for $1. I'm just saying. Judge Porry. And it's spelled Yeardley. I know y'all seen them soaps. John Porry, Porry, the translator of Leo the African's book into English, was Yeardley's cousin. And he ventured to Jamestown in 1619 to serve as Yeardley's secretary. On July the 30th, 1619, Yeardley convened an inaugural meeting of elected politicians in colonial America, a group that included Thomas Jefferson's great-grandfather. These lawmakers named John Porter their speaker, the English translator of Leo the African's book, who had defended curse theory, thus became colonial America's first legislative leader. John Porter set the price of America's first cash crop, tobacco, and recognized the need for labor to grow it. So when the Anglicans bound for slavery arrived in August, they were right on time. There's no reason to believe that George Yeardley and the other original enslavers did not rationalize their enslavement of African people in the same way that other British intellectuals did, and in the same way that Latin American slaveholders did, by considering these African people to be stamped from the beginning as a racially distinct people, as lower than themselves, and as lower in the scale of being than the more populous white indentured servants. The 1625 Virginia census did not list the ages or dates of arrivals for most Africans, nor did the census list any of them, despite in some cases the fact that they had resided in Virginia for 6 years as free. Africans were recorded as distinct from white servants. When Yeardley died in 1627, he willed to his heirs his good debts, chattel servants, niggers, cattle, or any other things. Thynge. Niggers, Negars, were dropped below servants in the social hierarchy to reflect the economic hierarchy. Yep, he wrote it down how everybody go. And this stratification became clear in Virginia's first judicial decision, explicitly referring to race. The court ordered a white man in 1630 to be soundly whipped before an assembly of Negroes and others for abusing himself to the dishonor of God and the shame of Christianity by defiling his body in line with a Negro. The court contrasted the polluted black woman and the pure white woman, with whom he could lie without defiling his body. It was the first recorded instance of gender racism in America, of considering the body of the black woman to be a tainted object that could defile a white man upon contact. Richard Mather never saw a slave ship leave the Liverpool docks during his ministerial tenure in Toxteth in the 1620s. That's Toxteth, Toxteth. Liverpool did not become England's main slave ship station until 1740s, succeeding London and Bristol. British slave traders were slowly expanding their activities in the 1620s, unlike all of those Anglican persecutors of Puritans. The death of King James and the coronation of his son, Charles I, in 1625 set off a persecuting stampede. William Ames, a disciple of William Perkins, who was exiled in Holland, stilled Richard Mather, John Cotton, and countless other Puritans with the marrow of sacred divinity. Translated from Latin into English in 1627, the treatise described the sacred divinity of spiritual equality between a free man and a servant, the sacred divinity of inferiors owning subjection and obedience to their superiors, and the sacred divinity of our blood kin being given more love than strangers. The Marrow's explanation became a guiding principle for Mather's generation of Puritans settling the Massachusetts Bay Area in the late 1620s and the 1630s. Puritans used this doctrine when assessing Native American and African strangers, ensuring intolerance from the start in their land of intolerance. Beginning in 1642, Anglican monarchists and non-conforming parliamentarians. Beginning in 1642, Anglican monarch and non-conforming parliamentarians locked arms in the English Civil War. As New England Puritans welcomed the non-conforming parliamentarians, Virginian royalists, they prayed for their retreating King Charles I. They prayed for their retreating King Charles I. And he was King James' son, I think. But in 1649, he was executed. 3 years later, Virginia was forced to surrender to the new ruling parliament. The economic hierarchy that had emerged in Virginia resembled the pecking order that William Ames had proposed and that Puritans established in New England. Although their political and religious allegiances differed, large planters and ministers and merchants stood at the top. Men like John Moultrie of Virginia's Northern Neck, who used his power to acquire fertile land, solicit trade, procure labor, and keep legally free people, like Elizabeth Key, enslaved. Elizabeth Key was the daughter of an unnamed African woman and Newport News legislator, Thomas Key. Before his death, Thomas had arranged for his biracial daughter to be freed at age 18. Her subsequent masters, however, kept her enslaved. At some point, she adopted Christianity. She birthed a baby whose father was William Greenstead, an English indentured servant and amateur lawyer on Moultrie's plantation. Upon Moultrie's death in 1655, Key and Greenstead successfully sued the estate for her and her child's freedom. Virginia planters followed the Key case almost as closely as they followed the English Civil War. They realized that the English common laws regarding not enslaving Christians and stipulating that the father's status determined the child's status both superseded curse theory, climate theory, beast theory, evangelical theory, and every other racist theory substantiating Black and biracial enslavement. Elizabeth Key had ravaged the ties that planters had unofficially used to bind African slavery. For Virginia planters, the timing of the Key case could not have been worse. By the 1660s, labor demands had grown. Virginians had uprooted more indigenous communities to expand their farmlands. Landowners were looking increasingly to African laborers to do the work, since their lower death rates made them more valuable and more permanent than temporary indentures. But at the same time, the bloody English Civil War that had driven so many So many from England to America had come to a close, and new socioeconomic opportunities in England slowed the flow of voluntary indentured migrants. The white servants still arrived and partnered with the enslaved Africans in escapes and rebellions, possibly bonding on similar stories of apprehension, being lured onto ships on the western coast of Africa or Europe. Planters responded to labor demands and laborers' unity by purchasing more African people and luring whiteness away from blackness. In the first official recognition of slavery in Virginia, legislators stipulated in 1660 and in stricter terms in 1661 that any white servant running away in company with any Negroes shall share for the time of the said Negro's absence, even if it meant life. In 1662, Virginia lawmen plugged one of Key's freedom loopholes to resolve doubts that have arisen whether children got by an English doubts that have arisen whether children got by an Englishman upon a Negro woman should be free or slave. They proclaimed that all children born in this country derive their status from the condition of their mother. Trashing English law, they dusted off the Roman principle of partus sequitur ventre, Partus sequitur ventren, which held that among tame and domestic animals, the brood belongs to the owner of the dam or mother. With this law in place, white enslavers could now reap financial reward from relations upon a Negro woman. But they wanted to prevent the limited number of white women from engaging in similar interracial relations, as their biracial babies would become free. In 1664, Maryland legislators declared it a disgrace to our nation when English women intermarried with Negro slaves. By the end of the century, Maryland and Virginia legislators had enacted severe penalties for white women in relationship with non-white men. In this way, heterosexual white men freed themselves through racist laws to engage in sexual relations with all women. And then their racist literature codified their sexual privileges. The Isle of Pines, a bizarre short story published in 1668 by former English parliamentarian Henry Neville, gave readers one such ominous account. The tale purposely begins in 1589, the year the first edition of Richard Halley's Principal Navigations appeared. Surviving a shipwreck in the Indian Ocean, George Pine finds himself alone on an inhabited island with an English 14-year-old girl, a Welsh maidservant, another maidservant whose whiteness is clear and ethnicity is not, and one Negro female slave. For Pine's idleness and fullness of everything begot in me a desire of enjoying the women. He persuades the two maids to lie with him, and then reports that the English 14-year-old was content also to do as we did. The Negro woman, seeing what we did, longed also for her share. One night, the uniquely sexually aggressive black woman makes her move in the darkness while Pines sleeps. The Isle of Pines was one of the first portrayals in British letters of aggressive, hypersexual African femininity. Such portrayals served to exonerate white men of their inhuman rapes and to mask their human attraction to the supposed beast-like woman. And the portrayals just kept coming, like the slave ships just kept coming. Meanwhile, American enslavers publicly prostituted African women well into the 18th century, privately thereafter. In a 1736 exchange of letters on the inextricable sexuality and service of African ladies, single white men were counseled in the South Carolina Gazette to wait for the next shipping from the coast of Guinea. Those African ladies are of a strong, robust constitution, not easily jaded out, able to serve them by night as well as day. On their Isles of Pine in colonial America, white men continue to depict African women as sexually aggressive, shifting the responsibility of their own sexual desires to the women. Of the nearly 100 reports of rape or attempted rape in 21 newspapers in 9 American colonies between 1728 and 1776, none reported the rape of a black woman. Rapes of black women by men of all races were not considered newsworthy. Like rape prostitutes, black women's credibility had been stolen by racist beliefs in their hypersexuality. For black men, the story was similar. There was not a single article in the colonial era announcing the acquittal of a suspected black male rapist. 1/3 of white men mentioned in rape articles were acknowledged as being acquitted of at least one charge. Moreover, newspaper reports of rape constructed white defendants as individual offenders and black defendants as representative of the feelings of their racial group, according to journalism historian Sharon Block. Already, the American mind was accomplishing that indispensable intellectual activity of someone consumed with racist ideas, individualizing white negativity and generalizing black negativity. Negative behavior by any black person became proof of what was wrong with black people, while negative behavior by any white person only proved what was wrong with that person. Black women were taught to aggressively pursue white men sexually, and black men were thought to aggressively pursue white women sexually. Neither could help it, the racist myth posited. They naturally craved superior whiteness. Black women possessed a temper hot and lascivious, making no scruple to prostitute themselves to the Europeans for a very slender profit. So great is their inclination to white men. This was dreamed by William Smith, the author of New Voyage to Guinea in 1744. And all of this lavishness on the part of black men and black women stemmed from their relatively large genitalia, the theory went. As early as 1482, Italian cartographer, Cartographer, Jamie Bertrand, depicted Mali Emperor Mansa Musa almost naked on his throne with oversized genitals. As early as 1482, Italian cartographer Jamie Bertrand depicted Mali Emperor Mansa Musa almost naked on his throne with oversized genitalia. Some white men were honest enough to broadcast their attractions, usually justifying them with assimilationist ideals. Royalist Richard Ligon, exiled from parliamentary England and Barbados, sat at a dinner adoring the black mistress of the colony's government. Barbados had become richer than all the other British colonies combined by the mid-1600s. Sugar was planted right up to the steps of homes, and the residents ate New England food instead of growing their own food. To Ligon, the black mistress had the greatest beauty and majesty together that ever I saw in one woman, exceeding Queen Anne of Denmark. Ligon presented her with a gift after the dinner. She responded with the loveliest smile I have ever seen. It was impossible for Ligon to tell what was whiter, her teeth or the whites of her eyes. This was one of the many small stories that made up Ligon's A True and Exact History of the Island of Barbados in 1657, the year Elizabeth Key's case was finally settled. In one story, a submissive slave named Sambo tells on his fellows who are planning a slave revolt, and refuses his reward. Well, damn. So he told on the other slaves and then refused the reward that they were going to give. In another, Ligon informs a cruel master of Sambo's desire to be made a Christian. By English law, we cannot make a Christian a slave, the master responds. My request was far different from that, Ligon replies, for I desired him to make a slave a Christian. If Sambo becomes a Christian, he can no longer be enslaved, the master says, and it will open such a gap that all of the planters in the island would be upset. Ligon lamented that Sambo was to be kept out of the church, but at the same time, he gave enslavers a new theory to defend their enterprise. Blacks were naturally docile, and slaves could and should become Christians. Planters had feared the conversion of slaves because they believed that if their slaves were Christian, they would have to be free. And Elizabeth Key's successful suit showed that the law supported this belief. Ligon's distinction between making a Christian a slave and a slave a Christian turned this idea on its head. Though it took time, eventually it became the basis for closing the religious loophole Key had exposed, Elizabeth Key. Ligon lifted the biblical law of converting the unconverted over British law barring the enslavement of Christians. He promoted the idea of baptizing enslaved Africans through the docile figure of Sambo, and planters and intellectuals almost certainly got the point. Submissive, confessing Sambo desired Christianity, and he should be permitted to have it. Indeed, Christianity will only make slaves more docile. Told y'all. Ligon's recommendation of Christianizing the slave for docility appeared during a crucial time of intellectual innovation. And as intellectual ideas abounded, justifications for slavery abounded too. And just like today is a crucial time for intellectual innovation, critical thinking outside the box. But religion got your mind. Christianity got your mind so docile that you can't recognize this time as what it is. Over November 28, 1660, a dozen men gathered in London and founded what became known as the Royal Society. Europe's scientific revolution had reached England. Italians initiated the Accademia dei Lincei in 1603. The French La Académie Française, I guess it's franchise, but it's spelled Francaise, was founded in 1635, and the Germans established their National Academy, Leopoldina, in 1652. King Charles II chartered the Royal Society as one of the first acts of his restored anti-Puritan monarchy in 1660. One of the early leaders of the Royal Society was one of England's most celebrated young scholars, the author of The Skeptical Chemist, Chymist, and that was in 1661, and the father of English chemistry, Robert Boyle. In 1665, Boyle urged his European peers to compile more natural histories of foreign lands and people, with Richard Ligon's History of Barbados serving as the racist prototype. The year before, though, Boyle had jumped into the ring of the racial debate of the nature of whiteness and blackness. He rejected both curse and climate theories and knocked up a foundational anti-racist idea. The seat of human pigmentation seems to be but the thin epidermis or outward skin, he wrote. And yet, this anti-racist idea of skin color being only skin deep did not stop Boyle from judging different colors. Black skin, he maintained, was an ugly deformity of normal whiteness. The physics of light, Boyle argued, showed that whiteness was the chiefest color. He claimed to have ignored his personal opinions and clearly and faithfully presented the truth as his Royal Society deceived. As Boyle and the Royal Society promoted the innovation and circulation of racist ideas, they promoted objectivity in all of their writings. Intellectuals from Geneva to Boston, including Richard Mather's youngest son, Increase Mather. Yeah, that's his name. Intellectuals from Geneva to Boston, including Richard Mather's youngest son, Increase Mather, carefully read and loudly hailed Boyle's work in 1664. A 22-year-old, unremarkable Cambridge student from a farming family copied full quotations. As he rose in stature over the next 40 years to become one of the most influential scientists of all time, Isaac Newton took it upon himself to substantiate Boyle's color law. Light is white as standard. In 1704, a year after he assumed the presidency of the Royal Society, Newton released one of the most eminent books of the modern era, Optics. Whiteness is produced by the convention of all colors, he wrote. Newton created a color wheel to illustrate his thesis. The center was white of the first order. The center was white of the first order, and all the other colors were positioned in relation to their distance from whiteness. In one of the foundational books of the upcoming European intellectual renaissance, Isaac Newton imagined perfect whiteness. Robert Boyle will not live to read Optics. He died after a long and influential life, Races has, in 1691. During his lifetime, he did not merely found chemistry, whiten light, power the Royal Society, and inspire Isaac Newton, the Mather clan, and thrones of intellectuals on both sides of the Atlantic. Boyle sat on the original Council for Foreign Plantations in 1660, which was commissioned concurrently with the Royal Society to centralize and advise the vast empire that Charles II inherited. In 1661, Boyle's council made its first formal plea to planters in Barbados, Maryland, and Virginia to convert enslaved Africans. This act shall not impede, restrain, or impair the power of masters. The council made sure to note that. The council's pleas resounded louder and louder each year as the plantation economy surged across the Western Hemisphere, as a growing flock of powerful British ministers vied for submission of African souls, and as planters vied for submission of their bodies. Yeah, the minister wanted their souls, and the planters wanted their bodies. Missionaries endeavored to grow God's kingdom as planters endeavored to grow profits. The marriage of Christian slavery seemed destined, but enslaved Africans balked. The vast majority of Africans in early America firmly resisted the religion of their masters, and their masters balked too. They was appalled, and the masters was appalled. Saving their crops each year was more important to them than saving souls. But of course, they could not say that and risk angering their ministers. Enslavers routinely defended their inaction by claiming that enslaved Africans were too barbaric to be converted. The racist debate over the cause of blackness, climate or curse, had been joined by this new racist debate over blacks' capability for Christianity. The segregationists belief that enslaved Africans should not or could not be baptized was so widespread and so taboo to discuss, as Richard Lygon found in Barbados, that virtually no enslaver took to writing to defend it in a major piece in the 1600s. That did not stop the assimilationists, who believed that lowly enslaved Africans practicing their supposed animalistic religions were capable of being raised to Christianity. In the 1660s, there emerged a missionary movement to publicize this divine duty to resist slaveholders and slaves. Richard Mather's grandson spent his adult life carrying this movement to the churches of New England, but Mather did not live to see it. Honey, we made it to chapter 4. I can't go on if I want to. I'll fall asleep after the first paragraph. I know it. But tomorrow we will start saving lives and not bodies. Saving souls and not bodies. See, I told you. Yeah, but there's some good reading right here, though. Yes, honey. But as we know now, it's 4 chapters. It won't take us long to finish this. It's 4 chapters. 4 chapters it is. Thank you so much for your patience and your presence. My people. My people, I love you. I love y'all to life and afterlife now. I love you, and I'm not here to lie to you, to mislead you, nothing. We learning this. We learning this truth, this history right here, so we can critically think about our life going forward on this planet with the other groups of people, namely white America. So we can critically think about our afterlife forever and ever and ever. Going forward from this moment forward, we got some decisions to make. Where you gonna spend it at now? You may not have no pain in heaven. You may not have no hunger in heaven. You may just be wingless, flyless. You can't fly. You ain't got your own freedom in heaven. But that's a decision we each got to make for our own self. Ain't nobody gonna cross over that bridge but you. Ain't nobody gonna fit in that one box but you. Well, unless by then they got them huge caskets that they were showing years ago with like 10 people fit in one. For them concentration camps that they got up and stuff, but I'm just saying. But as far as this right here, we each gonna have to make our own decision where we want to spend the rest of our eternity at. Now, you get in heaven and stuff, you go on and come on back to earth. But when you get to the afterlife, you might not want to come back to this earth, to this realm again. Young Dee Dee, it's so good to see you. Where's Cow Dog? Cow Dog, it's so good to see you. I'm wonderful, my brother. I'm just here to read to my people so we can get these lessons and we can learn what we need to know going forward. It's so much happening, so much being taken away from us. It's more imminent that we learn everything that we can. We got these books right here. We got these books for a reason, not to just set them up on the shelf and look at them or read them to ourselves, although I do enjoy reading to myself. But this right here is something new. We're in a new era now. So I'm trying my best, everything that's in me, to evolve also with this new era that we in. All of this information didn't reach me for nothing, so I want to use it for my people. Yep. I love y'all so much. I love you to life and afterlife. And I see you on the next page. And we went a little bit over, but I'm tired. I'm sleepy. I wanted to get a little bit more done on this book right here. Instead of 2 chapters, we're reading 4 chapters now. So it don't take us too long. And I love you. And I see you tomorrow on the next page.